All right, good morning, class. We're ready to start our fifth lesson here in chapter 8, and we're going to do some pretty cool graphing today, but we're going to use the solutions of a graph in order to graph it. And we're going to go back and try to remember what we did when we were solving quadratic equations, because when you look at this equation, that should look kind of familiar, right? Where we were foiling those or we were factoring in order to get those. And we are going to do some factoring today, so hopefully you can recall that. But here's the first question you have to ask yourself on these, because we are going to graph this. But the way we're going to graph it is we're going to use the zeros or the factors or the solutions. Those are all the same word in order to graph it. So what would make that parenthesis 0? Remember when we did this? We said x minus 2 equals 0. And x plus 4 equals 0. And we solve those little mini equations by adding 2, subtracting 4, and saying, okay, x equals 2 and x equals negative 4, right? So if this is one solution and this is the other solution, remember I have to have some symmetry in my parabola. So where is the axis of symmetry going to be in relationship to these 2 points? Well, it better be halfway in between. How do we find the halfway point? How do we find the midpoint, right, of those two? Well, it's kind of like finding the average between them. And how do we find the average? We add these together and we divide by 2. Okay, so 2 plus negative 4 is negative 2 divided by 2. We're going to get negative 1. Now, when you look at it, it should kind of look like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Let me go with a different color here for the axis of symmetry. That should make sense that that is the halfway point between those two, right? Because this is 3 units away and this is 3 units away. And so I know my vertex has to be somewhere on that axis of symmetry. But this right here is the key. I know that negative 1 is the x value of that vertex, okay? And so let me erase a couple things right here so that we can go back and figure out where exactly our vertex is, okay? All right, so in order to find the vertex, I'm going to take this negative 1 right here, and I'm going to plug it in for x, because I know that's the x value of my vertex. So negative 1 minus 2 and negative 1 plus 4, right? So what's negative 1 minus 2? Well, let's do our 2 marks. That's negative 3. Negative 1 plus 4 is positive 3. So what does that tell me? The y value of my vertex is negative 9. The x value was negative 1 because that's what I plugged in, and I got negative 9. So my vertex can be way down here, okay, at negative 9. But here's the good news. I already know 2 other points, right? I know my 2 solutions that I found out from the very beginning. Also, if I multiply those together, I get negative 8. So I know another 2 points because of symmetry, right? And symmetry. So now I can draw from my vertex up through that one and up through that one. Okay, so I can use my 2 numbers here to find the vertex to graph the problem. All right, let's do another one. Okay, let's do f of x is equal to x minus 4 and x plus 1. Okay, so remember, first step, find out what makes that those equal to 0, right? So x equals 4, x equals negative 1. So if I put those on my graph, 4 and negative 1, now I got to find the halfway point by dividing it by 2. That's 4 plus negative 1 is 3. Sorry, I screwed that up. It's positive 3 over 2. looks like 1.5, okay? And oh yeah, I know, we're gonna have some fractions every now and then. That's all right. So there's my axis of symmetry, okay? And now I know the number that I gotta plug in. I know most of you like decimals, so we'll plug it in with the decimal. Okay, so now I put 1.5 in for my x everywhere. Okay, so now 1.5 minus 4 is negative 2.5, and you could use a calculator for that. And this is positive 2.5. Maybe we should start seeing a pattern there. When I multiply those together, I get negative 6.25. So my vertex is now at 1.5, negative 6.25. Okay, I already have my axis of symmetry at 1.5, so now I just got to come down here to negative 6.25, maybe right in there somewhere, and now I can graph my graph because I know my other 2 points up here where the zeros were, or the solutions. Okay, and so there's my graph. Okay, I probably should have hit negative 4 a little bit better, because remember, if we multiply these together, that gives us our y-intercept. So probably should have hit those a little bit better, but that's the basic shape of the graph. And what I expect you to do is to use these numbers to find your x value of the axis of symmetry in the vertex, plug that in, and come up with your y value. Okay. Now, let's do one last type of problem, just to kind of challenge you a little bit. What if it looks like this? Now, we should already know how to graph this, right? Because we know it's going to be a vertical translation down 8, right? And it's going to be stretched by a factor of 2, a vertical stretch by a factor of 2. But let's look at how we could use solutions to graph it in a little different format, right? So let's try to think back to factoring. In factoring, we said, are there any common factors I can factor out? Well, what about the 2? I can divide by 2 on both of these, and I get x squared minus 4. That should look familiar. That's the difference of perfect squares. And it factors into x minus 2 and x plus 2. Well, that's nice, because now I know my 2 solutions are at 2 and negative 2, right? So this one gives me x equals 2, and this one gives me x equals negative 2. So what's the halfway point between 2 and negative 2? Well, that's right, 0. So if I plug 0 in, okay, so 2 times negative 2 and 2, well, 2 times 2 times 2 with one negative sign gives me negative 8. So my vertex is at 0, negative 8. Okay, and I already have my 2 points up here, so I'm going to just draw them right through there and right through there. And now I have my graph. Okay, so there's 3 examples for you to be able to use the solutions, or the zeros, right? All these words mean the same thing. Solutions, zeros, roots. Okay, those all mean the same thing. It's these points, these x-intercepts. Okay, and so we can use the x-intercepts to find the midpoint, which is the axis of symmetry, and use that, plug that in to find the y value of the vertex in order to make our graph. Okay, so today's assignment, we'll be dealing with that, and so good luck on that, and that's it for today.